Hello, and welcome back to a new series of the Politics of It All podcast. My name is Benjamin Evans, the Deputy Editor here at Raw News, and your host for this series, where we hope to go behind the stories and lose ourselves in some of the key questions of our time. In today's episode, I sat with the leadership of the American Politics Society, Patrick Schnecker, their president, and Casey Jane Collins, their vice president. We spoke about what their society has planned for the upcoming year and election season, as well as their synopsis of what has been an unpredictable and undeniably intriguing campaign so far. We ended the episode discussing the big topic for this week. This centered on a movement that has shaped the American right to become something that would have been unimaginable just a decade ago. This is, of course, the MAGA movement and the sensation that has been Trumpism. A force that brought millions of voters to the ballot box for the first time in 2016, and since then has reshaped the electoral landscape. Our question is whether this movement can sustain losing its figurehead, and what its future iterations may look like. Ultimately, with Trump stating that this will be his last election if he loses, would a Republican defeat in 2024 mark the end of Trumpism? So I'm here with Casey and Patrick from the American Politics Society. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves, why you joined, and what do you have plans for this year?
I'll let you start.
Thank you. I'm Patrick. I'm the president of the American Politics Society this year. We started the American Society. I'm one of the co-founders 2 years ago, and I was originally treasurer, now got elected as president for this year. We originally started it actually here after a podcast at Raw News, funnily enough.
Best things naturally start.
Where best things naturally start, yes. And we started it out of our frustration that there wasn't already one. There wasn't one central hub where you could discuss American politics freely, meet a bunch of people interested in American politics. We are actually the first and still only American Politics Society in the country. And I definitely think there should be more. There should be a forum, a wider forum for American politics where you can discuss public affairs, policy, anything really.
Definitely, especially in this year, the most important of years.
Absolutely.
And Casey, why did you join?
I'm Casey. I'm the vice president. I joined the society last year. I saw Patrick and the team had a lot of really interesting events that I just went to as a spectator. And a lot of the committee was graduating, and I was really interested in actually getting involved. I've had some fun experiences working with U.S. politics and working with the government. And so I'm really passionate also about kind of translating, I think, to a lot of international students that are really passionate about American politics, which I think is great. But sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect with, I think, what's really happening and what people may be hearing overseas. So happy to bring that to some of our events.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's probably one of the few countries where most of us around the world are so intrinsically connected to the politics of it. And so explaining it to people and helping people learn about it is massively important. Yeah. So you guys have a roadmap towards the presidential election on the 5th of November. What do you guys have planned?
So we have quite a few panels lined up for the first few weeks. Our first one is on October 2nd, and we're hosting a panel on the state of the Republican and Democratic parties since 2016. And again, it's going to be pretty election focused. So it's going to be how that transition post 2016 might affect the election. But again, we'll mention non-election stuff too, hopefully. Do you want to take the other events? Or?
Yeah, one that we're really looking forward to, we're doing a collaboration with King's Think Tank. That's going to be focusing a lot on disinformation, misinformation, and how that can challenge any elections, but specifically how that is going to challenge, or maybe not challenge, we'll have to come to the event and see, but how that's going to impact the upcoming election. So we're really excited about that one.
And we also have a collaboration with the King's Politics Society, which is going to be a Cambridge Union style debate, so British parliamentary style. I won't spoil the motion just yet. You'll have to come and find out, but it will be a very interactive debate. It won't be your typical KCL Politics Society debate. It will be hopefully more.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Oh, for the best, for the better.
Definitely, yeah. And then, of course, the final event, the big day on the actual election itself, we have Raw News, American Politics Society, and KCL Politics Society coming together in the vault
all night.
Really excited.
Yeah.
We're thinking it's going to be the biggest student-led event of the year, and so we're really excited for it.
It sure could be. I mean, a lot of people have already shown their interest, whether it was at the Fresher Fair, at the Politics 101, at our first social of the year. We've been getting a lot of questions from both Americans and non-Americans about what we're going to do for the election. Is there anything going on? And whenever we tell people we don't want to spoil the entire night. We'll give them a little hint here and there, and people are really excited, and the vault is going to be packed.
It's going to be rocking in there, for sure.
They
Sure.
will.
And I suppose, how does life after the election look for you guys?
Whew, that's a good question.
It's American politics. You can't really know until it happens, I guess. But we do have, our second semester is planned out pretty differently. So for the first semester, we're really focusing on domestic politics. We're focusing on the election. We're focusing on, the two candidates, their parties, and how, or what can happen up to November. Second semester, if you want to take it.
Yeah, second semester, we're doing a very foreign policy focused semester. I think depending on the outcome of the election, I'm sure that there's going to be conversation after. We'll likely still be talking about the November election in semester 2, but we've got a lot of fun plans with some other societies that we won't spoil too soon, but we're really excited to have some more regional focus that I think will be very international and very interesting to students not from the United States.
Brilliant. That sounds great. Well, let's get into this election. This is the sort of the big culmination. And how would you guys sum up the election so far in 3 words?
I would say, and I actually have an article for Roar News here from the latest print edition.
Shameless self-promo.
Shameless self-promo.
It's Roar News.
There's nothing
We
wrong
love
with
that.
that. And I titled it, there's 3 words in the title which I still live by, and it's comedy, drama, and thriller.
Mm-hmm.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, mine I feel like aren't as punchy as Patrick's, but I think my 3 words is always something new. I've got multiple, maybe too many news apps on my phone, and the notifications that I'm getting, granted, you get stuff from all over the world, but the amount of election events that I'm getting on my phone almost daily seems crazy and seems unprecedented, although I'm young, so maybe this is the first election that I'm really feeling it.
Yeah.
It is insane because we were told in 2016 that it was unprecedented. In 2020 was meant to be the biggest election ever. And now here it feels like chopping and changing every single day, and no one can really call it so far. Would you guys like to take us through some of the key events that have happened in this election so far?
Yeah. Do you want to start? How far back do we want to go is the question.
Are we going back to the 70s? Or are we going back?
No, I say let's start. I say the biggest event in my mind, I say that everyone thought was going to define it was the assassination attempt.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And there was the photo with his fist in the air and thought that was it,
fight.
game over.
Yeah.
Trump's won.
Yeah. I mean, when I saw the notification of the assassination attempt, I think it was the New York Times was one of the first outlets to announce it.
That's how I found out too.
Donald Trump, what was it? The gunshots at Donald Trump rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, Trump on the floor, something like that. I opened it. Immediately, my first reaction was like, okay, Trump's our next president, right? After that, well, that was as in he's won the election. Usually with a really keystone moment like this, it's election defining, and it was going to be, or at least it looked like that. Especially like you mentioned, the photo of him with the fist in the air with the fight. A lot of Americans, and especially a lot of moderates, took it very personally. They took it as an attack on democracy from the shooter. They took it on, an assassination attempt, which, I'd say this is a pretty nonpartisan issue. It's not ideal to have, especially in a democracy like America.
It's scary.
It's terrifying. And the fact that it happened twice, even more so, albeit the second time, thankfully there was no shot taken. But
how were you feeling initially about sort of the health of your democracy? We had people from all ends of the spectrum, Bernie Sanders, saying, no, this is not what we do in America. Just beyond the political points, how did it feel? Because this is something you don't really expect to see.
It felt to me like a very different moment in Trump rhetoric, I would say, at first. I think something that Trump has been kind of struggling with is the notion of uniting the nation. That might not be true. Some people feel that, some people don't. But I do think in that instance, it was a point where a lot of American people felt like we'd gone too far and that that's not how anyone wants the election to go. And so I truly think there was a point where, I don't know if I can say everyone, right? There were some people that had extreme reactions to this. However, that America was united for a second. And I think that probably did really help, especially with these photos, that people really felt like, well, that's it. He's won.
And I think beyond that, it's the start of I say the start, it wasn't the start, the last June, July of this year,
Mm-hmm.
for the first time, I want to say ever in Trump's political career in the past 10 years, it almost seemed like for once he wasn't the bully, but he was the bullied, right? You had the assassination attempt. You had a lot of people, after the hush money trial in New York, a lot of people came out and said this is political persecution, right? Whether it is or not, I mean, each to their own. And it really looked like he was the victim.
Mhm.
And that has never happened in American public portrayal since 2016.
I've never known it, yeah. And it really did flip it all on its head. I suppose then to go across the aisle in the Democratic circle at the very same time, you have the sort of huddle around Biden. You have key donors, such as George Clooney, saying we are going to remove the money unless you leave. Jill Biden, sort of the stalwart, trying to stick with her husband for what she thought was best for him. But eventually he gets COVID. He sits down on his own, probably for the first time in a long time, considers it and steps down and endorses Harris. What do you think? What did that change in the race?
Oh gosh. Well, I would say, kind of going back to the lead up, I feel like it got a lot of international headlines. It got a lot of news. It got a lot of focus. I think it didn't have the surprise factor by the time the decision was actually made. I think a lot of people saw it coming. I think there was still maybe debate about whether it was the right choice. But I do think people had this feeling of inevitability. And I think people had kind of come to terms in the Democratic Party before that Harris is likely going to be the candidate. So I think almost in comparison the two, it didn't have that wow factor that I think Trump could really bank on. However, I feel like the reaction from the Democratic Party was still huge. And you saw a huge motion of enthusiasm for her. So it was, I thought, really interesting.
It was very surprising because I thought the sharks would be circling. People would be trying to maybe usurp Harris, but none of that happened. It was a massive kind of moment of unity. Okay, Obama didn't initially endorse her, but then I think the tide just swept. What do you think that did for the Democratic campaign?
I think, so I agree with Casey. I think this was within the Democratic Party, whether in cabinet or each of their individual teams, this was the thought out, a long-term plan, I think. You look at Biden's last year, he has objectively taken a step back in certain regards, especially in the public eye. He hasn't been doing individual interviews as much, not as many press conferences, and I think it was the natural move to Harris, who's much younger, seems fitter physically. And so I think the Democrats were very smart with it. They waited for Biden to win the primary, which he was always going to do, and then waited until the primary's finished, right before the DNC, to make Biden step down and let Kamala in. And I think it was very smart because Democrats, or
you're saying they sort of got rid of any kind of opposition
exactly
by Biden winning.
If you look at the poll, so in January, within the Democratic Party, the only person more unpopular in the polls than Biden was Kamala Harris. And so if you let Kamala Harris go into the primaries, as not even as president, because Biden had that advantage. He's the incumbent of the party. Naturally, he's going to have a lot of the support. But Harris, as the vice president, was going to be under a lot of pressure, was going to face very strong oppositions like we've seen with RFK. He was originally a Democrat turned independent. Marianne now turned Trump, yes. And so he went all across the aisle. And then even Marianne Williamson, who is a very famous American author who ran as a Democrat during the primaries. And she was polling minimally compared to Biden, but had it been Kamala, RFK, and Williamson, it would have been interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's fascinating. And then, so Harris got this massive sort of jump, which put them back in the race. Biden was really far behind at one point. But what's happened since then is there's been a sort of stagnation of Harris's polling because people tend to not totally know who she is. The opinion polls are putting Harris on 49%. Trump is on 45%. To any other kind of democracy, these seem like really high numbers, but it is a two-horse race. But of course, because of the Electoral College, which is a way in which the votes are translated into the winner, actually the popular vote doesn't really matter. And Harris is going to be very scared if her vote concentrates highly in those blue states. So in the swing states, which is North Carolina, Trump is up 1 point. Nevada, Harris is up 1 point. In Arizona and Georgia, Trump is up 1 point. Pennsylvania is crucial states where Harris is speaking today. Harris is up 1 point. Wisconsin, Harris is up 2, and Michigan, Harris is up 3. Where do you think these are going, and what are going to be the key issues to take these swing states to win the election?
So I feel like it's almost nearly impossible to predict. And I think maybe there will be an event in the next couple weeks that could cause us to predict. But I think even with the polls, I mean,
a third assassination attempt.
I don't know. But I think that there is a possibility that something could cause a trigger either for Harris or Trump in these swing states. I think it'll be close. And I really don't know if we'll ever be able to predict until the night of.
I agree. I think this is going to be the closest election since Bush-Gore in 2000. I think it will be decided by a few tens of thousands of voters, maybe a few 100,000, but still in America that's minuscule. It's tiny. Yeah, I agree. If there might be an event, there always seems to be an event a week in American
politics.
October
surprise?
The October surprise.
There always is something in October.
And the election is on Guy Fawkes this year. So maybe that says something about...
So there'll be fireworks on the
fireworks before that. Yeah, in terms of the swing states, polling up by 1 or 2% is nothing, especially...
It's the margin of error.
Exactly. Especially within the last month and 2 weeks of the election. We saw this happen in 2016 with Clinton, where she was up in virtually all crucial swing states by actually larger margins than Harris is this year. And we saw what happened there. So polls are good to an extent, and you can kind of get an idea of public influence. And I think the idea or public portrayal of the candidates, and I think what we're getting this time around isn't who's going to win, but that it's going to be very, very close.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing Harris is really trying to hammer down the reproductive rights issue. Mm-hmm. I think what she's trying to do there is trying to get a certain section of, especially women in the population, who may have otherwise potentially swung either to Republican or been more on the fence. She's trying to get them over now to sort of say, no, this is it's a bigger issue than even politics itself. Mm-hmm. What Trump is really trying to do is hammer down the anger that there is with Bidenomics, the cost of living crisis that's going on in America. Which one of those do you think has the biggest weight to people? What do you think that's?
I think that's hard to say, and this is going to be the worst answer ever, but I really think it depends on the person. And I think that those two issues, Patrick and I think agree that a third in there is probably immigration. Yeah. I think those 3 issues really tie and talk to people's fears for the future. And I think to some people, their biggest fear is the economy. And to some people, it is reproductive rights. To some, it's immigration. And I think that's such a personal kind of like cost and benefit analysis you almost have to do if you're someone who's on the edge. I do think that there are a lot of people who, like, those 3 aren't the determining effect. But when it comes to the swing states, I think those will be huge.
Yeah, I also think you have to look at the swing state itself. If you look at Pennsylvania,
it's the economy.
It definitely is the economy.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at Arizona or Nevada, immigration might be slightly higher.
Mm-hmm.
So it really depends. I think overall, I think there was an Emerson poll or CNN poll a week ago where I think economy was number 1. And there were a few shocking ones in there. Foreign policy was only number 9, I want to say.
Famously, it doesn't decide elections.
Exactly. But I think the economy will still be number 1. It usually tends to be because it's a pretty cross-societal issue, and everyone is directly impacted by it one way or another. So I think that'll be the main one.
Okay, interesting. And now, sort of summing up to sort of go back to the final part of this podcast now, which is this wider debate. Trump has said this week that if he loses, he's not going to be standing in 2028. Now, we don't know if that's true or not, but given his age, we can probably assume it to be the case. So if the Republicans do lose in 2024, is this looking like the end of Trumpism? And I think the way to start that is shall we try and define what Trumpism is itself? Is it this blend of sort of Christian conservative values, national populist rhetoric, and economic protectionism, or is it something deeper than that?
I can try to start. I think
I've just had a lot of long words, to be honest.
Yeah. I think I struggle with having a one definition of like the ideology of Trumpism. And I think especially when he was first running, I would have called Trumpism just like a rejection of the political status quo. Now he's like been in the game long enough that it's like, is it still a rejection of the political status quo? He's been president. We saw that
he was the status quo.
He was the status quo. He got rid of some things. He did the new ones. I think it's also been hard is throughout the time, Trump has not stuck to like one ideology on all of his policy issues, which is normal for a candidate. That's not like an irrational thing for a candidate to change their mind. But he has also traditionally not stayed like far right. We hear, oh, all politics are getting far right and far left, but a lot of Trump's policies to me do not feel far right. But I think he's still managed to like paint himself as a picture of like a Republican, conservative, far right, even though he's introducing these policies like that to me feel very big government and like very just different than what you would have imagined. Maybe that speaks to his background. Like he has not always been publicly a right candidate. So
yeah, it's hard.
It's interesting. And maybe just looking at the transition to Trumpism prior to 2016, what, for sort of listeners who don't know as much about American politics, what was the traditional Republican values prior to that, some of the Reagan-like values, and why do they differ?
So again, this actually changed quite a lot over the last century. So you look at, you look at 1920s, 100 years ago. You look at 1920s Republicanism, and that was Calvin Coolidge, Warren Harding, Herbert Hoover, that was the start of what people nowadays consider the Republican ideology, which is small government, laissez-faire economics, small taxes, high tariffs, America first.
Law and order, and in terms of foreign policy, isolationism. That was the original modern-day republicanism. You go ahead of a couple decades and you look at Reagan, that actually changed quite a lot. Yes, economically, you were still the party of small taxes and a lot of investment, small government, neoliberalism. But in terms of foreign policy, you became a more hawkish party. And this actually started during the Second World War. But you became this party that wanted more interventionism in other countries. And we saw this with Bush Jr. in Iraq and Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And then Trump came along and he kind of implemented everything into one small bubble and was like, okay, I'll take a bit of Calvin Coolidge, I'll take a bit of Reagan, I'll take a bit of even Truman, who's a Democrat, but I'll take a bit of him. Do you think he sat there and thought, I'm going to do all this, or are we now putting almost too much of an academic concept onto what he is?
We definitely are. It's Trump. Yeah. Trump, and I was going to say in terms of Trumpism, defining it, I really wouldn't say Trumpism is the political ideology, more so the persona that we think of when we think of Trump. When people think of Trump, or when academics or political fanatics think of Trump and Trumpism, I highly doubt they think that, okay, Trump's political ideology, economic ideology is ABC. Instead, they look at him and they say, okay, this is Trump. This is who Trump is. This is what he comes across as. This is what he says. This is what he tweets. This is what he, right? And I think if he loses or if he wins and then, his second mandate ends, I do think that will die out of the Republican Party. I don't think there's anyone in the GOP right now who has Trump's level of confidence, or is that the right word? Very overly
sort of the strongman rhetoric, which is sort of going across the globe right now, which is it's really in demand, I suppose. So, Casey, why would you say that Trumpism works? It kind of brought millions of people who had never really been interested in politics, didn't think that they were being listened to almost at all, especially throughout the Midwest. In fact, J.D. Vance wrote a whole book on this, Hillbilly Elegy. And that's really what allowed it to be so popular. But why did it chime with those people? And are those people just going to go home now, stop voting?
That's another really difficult question.
Sorry.
I think, no, it's fine, but it's a nuance that even I think someone from these communities that are very pro-Trump it even sometimes surprises because he's got, I mean, he changes his narrative, but it's one narrative, it's one guy. And this same narrative somehow appeals to people that are like so different. And the Republican Party has such a broad, and it does have a very diverse voting bloc. I think sometimes internationally, that's not the image that comes to mind of like the Republican Party and who's voting for Donald Trump. But I do think in the Midwest, in kind of the communities that JD Vance is from, you see a lot of people who really felt historically left behind. Mm-hmm. And even though maybe sometimes Donald Trump's policies might not actually help them and might not actually pull them forward, sometimes they might, but he's able to sell it in a way that people think like he's gonna help us, he's for us. I do think also there's the people on also Silicon Valley. You're like, that's not a community that would vote for Trump. Like Palo Alto, California, but he's got policies that apply to them. The policy that
Elon Musk and co.
Elon Musk.
Well, we say Elon Musk and co, and I really want to touch upon this. I think that the voting base of not touch on Elon Musk on this idea in general. The voting base of the two parties has completely changed. The Republican Party used to be known as the party of the rich, the party of the upper class, right? And the Democratic Party was the party of the working class, the middle class. Mm-hmm. Whether that was because of their more larger welfare state idea compared to the Republican small government idea. If we look at their voting base now, and we look at their donors now, every single, and again, hyperbole, just for the record, but virtually every single billionaire in America has either publicly endorsed the Democratic candidate or has donated to their campaign. The only one for the Republican Party now is actually Elon Musk, who was also promised a seat in cabinet by Trump if he won. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. Making government more efficient.
Making government more efficient.
It's a good way to say cuts, isn't it?
It is. Deregulation, if you will.
So it's sort of fascinating. I mean, do you want to just expand on any of that? Or?
I do think it's interesting in some of the switches. You also see a lot of you see like universities. There's a lot of talk of universities, and you're seeing kind of highly educated people. That's a broad way to say that, but people with college degrees voting blue over voting red. But you also see a lot of single issue voters. Mm-hmm. And I think that's sometimes the appeal. He'll have a single issue that's popular to Elon Musk. There's a lot of policies that Trump is tweeting about, who knows if he'll actually implement them, that would benefit like all this tech industry, AI and everything. The Democratic Party seems much more inclined to implement a little more regulation on these industries. And it's just interesting to me, that ideology of you're hearing these policies that Trump would put in to benefit these people, and somehow someone still in like rural Ohio is sitting there being like, but this benefits me. Mm. And so somehow, I don't even know if anyone truly knows what that psychology is, but he really does have a true pull that I think we spend a lot of time, like in the UK at universities. Sometimes there's a lot of people who have this image of the person that votes for Donald Trump. And I hear a lot of people like, oh, it's all these uneducated Americans. And you're like, I mean, there's probably some of those out there, but it's half the country. Yeah. Like, not everybody voting for Trump is this image you have. Like, he really, truly has a pull and an appeal to people.
So it's almost a sort of many faces of Trump, really, and it's sort of cross-section across society like nothing else, really. So do you think that if he sort of did go, because he's all tied up in one person, the people who are left to potentially replace him represent one of these facets, but no one can fully have the monopoly on them all? I mean, Patrick, who could come in to replace him?
It's a very good question. Again, I think with American politics, it's predicting something like this. If I say a name now, I will look entirely stupid next year.
We've been in this room and done that many times.
We have. And I remember predicting, I think, on a podcast last year or a year and a half ago, we got asked who we think Trump's running mate is going to be. Mm-hmm. People said Nikki Haley. I think I said Kristi Noem, because Trump went to Kristi Noem's state, and they had a campaign together, and it was a great event. I mean, it was this huge event. And they had a little flash on the screen, Noem Trump 2024, right? Definitely PR stunt. But I mean, I was like, you never know. And it made sense politically. But no one said JD Vance, because no one knew who JD Vance was. And so if I sit here and tell you that J.D. Vance or Nikki Haley or Tim Scott, maybe even the resurgence of Ron DeSantis, will be the next leader of the GOP, you never know. Someone in the next 2 years, maybe in the 2026 midterms, there's going to be this new bright Republican that really appeals to the voting base. And so I couldn't tell you.
Casey, do you want to throw your hat in the ring?
I also would have to go with the answer I couldn't tell you. I could see either Donald Trump deciding not to run. Also, he said he wouldn't run again in 2020. Here we are. So I think it's also, even, is Donald Trump out of the
Did he say that in 2020?
Yeah. There's clips of him saying all sorts of things. And then I think changing his mind. So I think the question, even if he would truly leave, there's a possibility he doesn't run for president again, though, but is still that informal head of the party. And you've got people still listening to him.
Sort of like Obama with the Democrats. Now, right after his 2 terms, he obviously can't run again, but he's still, in terms of a lot of policy, he's still kind of the mastermind behind it, right? And he still really influenced the Biden campaign in 2020, and I'm pretty sure he will with the Harris campaign this year.
Would the Republicans need to go into some soul searching? Because Trumpism is massively popular, especially with the base. But as we're seeing with these figures, now, he might get helped out by the Electoral College again, but the majority of America has not voted for Trump. And actually, a lot of people who don't vote for Trump will probably never vote for Trump. There's a lot of that kind of never again, 50%. Do the Republicans need, if they lose again, a slight moderation, a slight rebrand? And do you think that'd be very hard with now the quite radical base that they've got?
One way I do think that there may be a bit of a crumble within the Republican Party where they're going to have to figure out if that's the direction they still want to go, if it's a direction that even works. I do, however, think some of that conversation is already being had. And I do think also we saw Nikki Haley run and how popular she was. And I think she was, to an extent, running on a lot of the same values and a lot of the same ideologies as Trump. She also was still very happy to endorse Trump to an extent. But I think we saw a lot of people that feel fed up with Trumpism were so happy and relieved to see a Nikki Haley, even if a lot of their policies are the same. But some of just the irate, aggressive behavior that they feel like they're sick of, she was kind of embodiment of that, I think at least. But a lot of her platform was the same. So is Trumpism really going to go away? Or is maybe the parts where he's really controversial, the way he acts, the way he speaks, maybe people are ready for a return to a little less aggressive candidates and less aggressive leader of the Republican Party?
We can't forget January 6th either. There'd be a lot of conservative Americans who would almost die for the Constitution, who'd say, I probably would vote for Trump, but actually, no, we have rules and laws, and I'm just going to sit this one out now. I can't vote at all. And maybe they need someone who is different. DeSantis was always called Trump in a suit. He kind of fell apart. Haley could be the next one for that. I think the demand for the policies are still there, clearly, but there's a section of the population which just can't get over him.
Yeah.
And so I suppose, where does that leave Trumpism without Trump itself? We've said there's so many different faces and so many different policies without the one man. Will it be the same thing?
So again, if we're considering Trumpism the ideology, the policies that Trump has, those will live for a long time within the GOP.
Is that what the American right now is, you think?
What the American right?
Yeah, the sort of right wing of American politics is now.
I think I'm seeing that the norm is now MAGA. And we've had, in my experience, you might disagree, but in my experience, hearing how people, I would say the dialogue around senators or governors or anyone that is not a MAGA Republican or is not endorsed Trump is a moderate Republican. Even if, to me, their policy platform is Republican to a T. I mean, these people have their A+ rating from the NRA. They've got their 0% from Planned Parenthood. And though those aren't the only two issues that define, but
they are the two badges you want as a Republican candidate.
But those are two things that, to a lot of people, if you would ask them a long time, that is a far right, maybe Republican, maybe not far right. But now those are moderates because they haven't endorsed Trump.
So this is the issue with American politics. People who aren't involved in American politics really have a lot of misconceptions regarding it. We see this a lot in the UK, I think. People look at anyone who is affiliated with the Republican Party or who considers themselves to be a Republican, and automatically there's this kind of, you support Trump, you're MAGA Trumpist, you're a radical. Whereas if you compare Trump with a lot of former Republican presidents, you actually see that in fact his policies aren't as radical, but his persona is. And this is again where the distinction between Trumpism insofar as ideology compared to Trumpism insofar as persona and personality, you really have to distinguish between them. So it's a catch-22.
So you think a lot of these things that he's saying, the rhetoric he's saying, sort of the dramatically high tariffs, the language he uses around immigration, do you think if he did win, then that wouldn't be implemented in the same manner? Or do you think this time, because last time he was surrounded by moderates, he kind of inherited the Republican establishment. A lot of them have now left his cabinet and flat out refused to work with him. Scaramucci's coming to King's very soon.
He is.
He will now be surrounded by Trump allies. Will that radicalise him in government? Are we now going to see a different Trump than one we saw in 16 to 20 then maybe?
You could say that, especially because he is limited to one term now. And so whatever he does, he doesn't have to appeal to the public. He doesn't have to win over voters. He can be Trump.
He said that people may not have to vote again.
On the other hand, I think there's still a lot of accountability in the U.S. I think, especially if, say, Trump wins, I don't see the GOP winning both houses or both chambers of Congress. So there will be that level of accountability. Even if they do win both, I still see a lot of Republicans, moderate Republicans in Congress, kind of not necessarily siding with the Democrats, but really scrutinizing what Trump does, what Trump will do. And so I really don't see Trump being this, if he wins, being this, big, radical dictator-esque figure. But I just see him being another person in the establishment, which he would hate to hear.
Yeah, I think Patrick and I might disagree here.
Finally.
I think, I don't know, it's hard to predict, obviously. I think he was not that different from kind of a traditional, a populist has connotations using that here, but you see a lot of time with populist leaders, you have all these ideas, they're really extreme, you get into power and you realize, actually, these aren't that feasible. Maybe I'm going to push the bounds a little bit, but really it often is not as extreme as we think. And in some ways, Trump policies that he had run on the first time he got into office, and I think realized that those weren't actually feasible and didn't go as far as maybe he promised. I do think, however, we have seen a trend of him surrounding himself with yes men, and I think that has increased. JD Vance, cabinet members, you see the members leaving him, people getting fired after the first no. And I do think that the more he does that and the more that he's not hearing about maybe some of these bounds that have existed or maybe should exist, that he could actually go way further than he did the first time. He also now knows how to be president. Not like that takes time to figure out. Joe Biden had years of political history, not as a president, but it takes time to figure out the system. We saw Donald Trump become president. Took him a little while. He chose to get rid of a bunch of people, bring in another group of people who didn't have experience. Took them a bit to get used to it. Now they have it figured out. And so I think that he would have all 4 years to do what he wanted, which people can decide if that's a good or a bad thing. But
yeah. So we're sort of potentially staring down the barrel of either a maybe more emboldened Trumpism or a Trumpism, if he loses, that will hold many of the same policies and facets of it, but the language may become moderated. Trumpism in a briefcase might be the future that we have. Can you guys predict at all which way we are going to be going on November 5th?
I don't know if I can. I think I've been impressed by the level of enthusiasm that the Harris campaign has maintained, because I think the Trump campaign, right, we talked about at the beginning of this episode, the huge rush after the assassination attempt, and that one, he it was a little more dramatic than the second one, obviously, but there was supposedly a second threat. The reaction was not the same by the American people or even by like his supporters, I think, to an extent. The kind of support, I think, of the Harris team and of people that are really excited for, I think, joy and like a new light, I think, on politics. A lot of people were feeling really down, and I think a lot of people truly felt like you were picking between two options. I've heard a lot of feedback from people watching the Harris administration. A lot of people in the Democratic Party don't feel that way anymore. And so I think that there's an opportunity for her to really recruit people in that moderate bit that are in these swing states that you don't know how they're going to vote. I also think you hear the chanting of USA at like the Democratic National Convention that has not really been at these Democratic events and rallies before, that I think them trying to espouse unity could really help her out.
Themselves somewhat.
Yeah, I think, which is like traditionally not really been what you associate with the Democrats. You would definitely associate that with the Republicans. So I think the way that they've maintained momentum and we're seeing them leading in the polls, I think that could, like, they could win with that. However, we did Biden and Trump was unique, going all the way back to Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump. We also thought that Hillary Clinton had it in the bag, and she did not.
I would say I think Harris has taken many notes from Clinton,
Absolutely.
and has almost learned how to handle Trump in a far better manner, and potentially handle the Democratic image in a far better manner as well. Patrick, do you agree it could just be a Harris win?
For the sake of me staying consistent over the past 2 years and all the podcasts I've done here at Roar News, I will maintain that I think Trump will just take it. I agree Harris had a very big rush of momentum, a lot of adrenaline early on in her campaign. It has died down slightly. Her honeymoon phase is over, essentially. We've seen polls, or the difference between Harris and Trump go from about 5 or 6% to now half of that, to about 3%. And that does say something. There's still a month left, and a month in American politics is a lot. Anything can happen again. We'll have to wait and see if there's another huge event in October. But I do see, because of the Electoral College, I do see Trump just scraping through.
Okay, well, there we are. It's too close to call. So the only way that you'll be able to find out is by coming to the election evening in the Vault on the 5th of November. Thank you guys so much for coming on the podcast, being the first guests. I hope you enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Once again, and thank you guys so much for listening. I have been Benjamin Evans. The producer and editor is Carrison. And we had some extra help from Giselle Patar and Tilly Lowdry. From the whole team, we hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed bringing it together. And I hope you enjoyed it as well.